Today, Sam Bankman-Fried is arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud. Billions of dollars leave Binance as investors question the exchange's reserves. And David Maria of Bittrex discusses what's next for the criminal investigation into FTX's implosion. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Kate Rooney. Digital currencies surging this morning after new economic data shows inflation may be slowing down. By noon Eastern, Bitcoin climbed more than $17,500. Ether, meanwhile, jumped to $1,300, and Chainlink rose to nearly $7. Okay, let's talk about the top stories. First, Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested in the Bahamas. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York charged the former FTX CEO with wire fraud and securities fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States and campaign finance regulations. Prosecutors said SBF's criminal activity allegedly went back as far as 2019, and legal experts told CNBC the speed of the indictment shows a high level of confidence in securing a conviction. Separately, the SEC accused Bankman-Fried of running a massive, years-long fraud in which he allegedly diverted customer funds for his personal benefit. SBF was taken into custody in the Bahamas and is expected to face extradition to the United States. Next, the House Financial Services Committee held a hearing today on the collapse of FTX. Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, noted that SBF was scheduled to testify under oath before that committee, but that his arrest prevented that from happening today.
Unfortunately, the timing of his arrest denies the public the opportunity to get the answers they deserve. Rest assured that this committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX. This failure is not just noteworthy for its size, but for the company's total disregard for standard business practices, governance, risk management, and criminal conduct.
Waters noted that now as many as 1 million people are locked out of their FTX accounts and might recover only a small amount of their, quote, hard-earned investments, if any at all. The goal of the hearing was to dig deeper into the events that led to the fall of FTX, the ties to its sister hedge fund Alameda, and to discuss the findings of the crypto exchange's new CEO, John Ray, who appeared before the committee today.
The FTX group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets.
Ray laid out some of those, quote, unacceptable management practices at FTX, which he said included the commingling of assets and the absence of audited or reliable financial statements. The Senate Banking Committee will hold their own hearing on the FTX collapse tomorrow. We, of course, will be monitoring that as well, and we'll bring you the very latest. Last up, investors are pulling billions of dollars off of Binance amid growing scrutiny over the exchange's reserves. Binance saw more than $1.5 billion of outflows in the past 24 hours, and the exchange temporarily halted withdrawals of the stablecoin USDC while it carried out what's called a token swap, or the exchange of one cryptocurrency for another. Of course, halting withdrawals isn't a clear sign of trouble at Binance, but investors have been jittery since the fall of FTX, and many have called for more transparency around crypto exchanges and their reserves. Last month, Binance claimed to have a reserve ratio of 101%, but critics say the company's proof of reserves hasn't gone far enough. There's also the report from Reuters that says the DOJ is looking to charge top executives for violating anti-money laundering rules. All right, on to our main story. Crypto World's Mackenzie Sigalo spoke to David Maria. He's head of litigation at Bittrex and a former prosecutor about SBF's arrest and what's next for the investigation into FTX's collapse.
Obviously a big day in terms of what's going on with Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX hearing on Capitol Hill. But let's focus on that indictment. The seal was lifted this morning. Walk us through what we learned in terms of what Sam Bankman-Fried is up against in terms of criminal charges here in the U.S.
So they're kind of broken down into three groups of victims. So he started with the first counts are against customers against FTX.com. I'll come back to that in a second. The second group is the lenders to Alameda. And then the third group would be investors in FTX.com. So these are all conspiracy charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, and securities fraud counts. What's interesting, I think, is that with regard to the FTX.com, that is customers of the international entity, so not their U.S.-based entity. So I think the highest hurdles are trying to prove the charges against customers from other countries, and in the indictment, they didn't show any real nexus to the U.S.
And in terms of next steps, Sam Bankman-Fried is expected in a court in Nassau today. He's meant to testify before the House. That's not happening. What does it look like in terms of a timeline for extradition? And then maybe we can talk about what next steps look like once he's on U.S. soil.
Yeah, I mean, tell you the truth, in terms of timeline from extradition from Bahamas to the U.S., it's guesswork on my end. Haven't been familiar with that before. I assume it'll happen and relatively quickly. The indictment was actually handed down on last Friday. So, and then it was just unsealed today. So obviously there's been back and forth over the weekend and through yesterday to figure out what would happen when the indictment would be sealed in the U.S. Next step, when he gets to the U.S., he'll come in for his bond hearing and his plea. He'll obviously likely plead not guilty. And then the question will be, will he be detained going forward?
Did anything surprise you today in what you saw in terms of this unsealing of that first indictment?
I mean, I think if you look both at this indictment and at the SEC's complaint, it's the dearth of allegations about the U.S.-based entity. And that can be somewhat of a hurdle as they move forward, especially on the customer side. The SEC complaint itself has a footnote in it that notes that the FTX U.S. is not the subject of the allegations there. So this is really what happened overseas in terms of the customer assets. And it's very possible that where this was happening, that was permissible. So that's one thing I found surprising is the sort of, this may come in the superseding ones, the lack of nexus to the U.S. for several of these counts.
You mentioned that we heard from the SEC today. The CFTC also had its own civil filing. Can you kind of walk us through the main touch points of each?
No, I mean, I think each one's in play now. As you may know, they have the competing legislations for who may be the regulator going forward. Obviously, DOJ is overarching any kind of criminal activity, but there's still sort of a battle going between whether the CFTC or the SEC will be the primary regulator of exchanges in the crypto world. So they're each just getting in their 2 cents. They're charging it the way they would. I think generally the allegations are the same in terms of the substance of them. So nothing surprising in any of those, but I think they all have hurdles in terms of the U.S. nexus for both the CFTC and the SEC.
So in terms of this turf war between the SEC and the CFTC, are we going to see that play out here? I mean, is one already seeming to get the upper hand? Is this a win for Gensler in terms of how he's spearheaded next steps with FTX so far?
So, it may not come to a head on this one because the SEC's complaint is based primarily on fraud against, as we said before, the lenders and investors, so not on customers. So they always, they're going to have jurisdiction if someone is offering equity investments in the form of securities to institutional investors and things along those lines. So this really isn't the one that I think will determine, where they are on the battle between the two agencies.
A lot of people have read into the timing, on the eve that we're going to hear from Sam Bankman-Fried under oath. He's taken into custody. Who knows when we will hear from him next? Any thoughts on that timing?
I mean, at first I was surprised, thinking they had a chance to, as a prosecutor, if you can get a guy to go under oath and say things that you think may be detrimental to his defense later and beneficial to your case, if you think he's going to lie, you want to hear it. And it's a transcript. What it led me to believe when I thought about it more was they may be thinking that he could be useful as a cooperator down the road and potentially give them info on others with whom he dealt, both in his company and maybe outside of it, if there's any of that. And once he goes and lies in the record, he has zero value as a cooperator. So they may have done this just to prevent him from testifying at the hearing today.
I've heard varying timelines as to what happens next once Sam Bankman-Fried is on U.S. soil. Some people say that a trial wouldn't kick off at the earliest until the end of next year, perhaps the year after that. I mean, from your experience, what are we looking at here?
It could be either of those. I mean, the Southern District moves relatively quickly. A lot of it will be dependent on whether he's detained, right? So he'll come in, he's going to say, I don't need to do that. We'll post a bond. I can be free. I can be on house arrest, whatever it may be. The government likely will seek detention. If he's in jail, he's going to want it to move a lot faster, right? So No one wants to be in jail pending a trial. But either way, we're a good year down the road from any trial, probably longer than that.
Okay, that's it for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow with a lot more. We'll see you then.